Magnus versus Gukesh Gagrab. Today, we witness a clash every chess fan has been waiting for. The world champion, Gukesh, playing with the black pieces, faces Magnus Carlsen once again. Will Magnus get his revenge, or will Gukesh continue his unstoppable rise? The game begins with Magnus playing pawn to c4, going for the English opening. He aims for a slow, strategic squeeze. Gukesh replies with pawn to e5, taking the center and signaling he wants an open fight. Magnus plays knight to c3. Gukesh develops bishop to b4, pinning the knight and preparing early tension. Magnus plays knight to f3, developing and eyeing the e5 pawn. Here, Gukesh immediately captures with bishop captures on c3. This damages Magnus's pawn structure in exchange for giving up the bishop pair, a typical modern approach by Gukesh. Magnus recaptures with pawn captures on c3. Gukesh plays pawn to d6, reinforcing his center and preparing development. Magnus plays pawn to e4, taking more space. Gukesh develops knight to d7, keeping flexibility for a c5 knight jump. Magnus plays bishop to d3, developing and controlling the e4 square. Gukesh plays knight to c5, taking the active outpost, eyeing b3 and d3. Magnus drops the bishop back to c2 to preserve his bishop pair, keeping flexibility. Gukesh develops knight to f6, attacking the e4 pawn. Magnus defends with queen to e2. Gukesh plays pawn to a5, gaining queenside space and preventing b4. Magnus plays knight to d2, planning to reroute to f1 and then e3. A typical maneuver to support the center. Gukesh plays pawn to g6, preparing fianchetto ideas and kingside expansion. Magnus plays knight to f1, sticking to the plan. Gukesh plays bishop to e6, developing and targeting c4 and d5. Magnus plays bishop to g5, pinning the knight on f6, increasing pressure. Gukesh responds with pawn to h6, challenging the bishop. Magnus retreats to h4, preserving the pin. Gukesh advances with pawn to g5, gaining space, forcing Magnus's bishop back to g3. Gukesh plays queen to d7, connecting rooks, keeping options to castle either way. Magnus plays pawn to f3, reinforcing the center, preparing to kick the f4 knight later. Gukesh plays knight to h5, repositioning for kingside play. Magnus plays knight to e3, completing the reroute, controlling the center. Gukesh plays knight to f4, attacking queen and bishop. Magnus plays queen to d2, keeping the tension. Here, Gukesh plays pawn to b5. A critical moment. Expanding on the queen side, opening lines while Magnus's king remains in the center. Magnus plays knight to d5, placing it on a strong centralized outpost. Gukesh captures with bishop takes d5, and Magnus recaptures with pawn takes d5, opening the e-file. Gukesh plays knight to h5, threatening the g3 bishop. Magnus responds with bishop to f2, keeping the bishops active. Gukesh moves his king to f8, improving safety without castling. Magnus plays pawn to g3, challenging the knight and controlling dark squares. Gukesh moves his king to g7, continuing manual king safety. Magnus develops with bishop to e3. Gukesh plays queen to e7, aligning with the center. Magnus plays rook to g1, hinting at kingside activity. Gukesh plays knight to f6, repositioning for defense and counterplay. Magnus plays pawn to b4, aiming to challenge the queenside. Gukesh captures with pawn takes b4. Magnus recaptures with pawn takes b4. Gukesh jumps knight to a4, attacking b2 and eyeing c3. Magnus plays bishop to d3, targeting the b5 pawn. Gukesh plays pawn to c6, striking in the center. Magnus captures with pawn takes c6. But Gukesh immediately plays pawn to d5, opening the center while Magnus's king is still uncastled. Magnus captures with pawn takes d5. Gukesh recaptures with knight takes d5, gaining activity. Magnus plays pawn to a3, defending b4. Gukesh plays rook to d6, doubling on the d-file. Magnus plays rook to c1, defending c-file and c6. Gukesh plays knight to c3, forking queen and bishop. Magnus finds bishop to c5, pinning the knight to the rook. Gukesh calmly plays knight takes b5, grabbing the pawn. Magnus plays bishop takes d6, grabbing the rook. Gukesh recaptures with knight takes d6, maintaining control with the knights. Magnus plays king to f2, bringing the king to safety. Gukesh plays knight to b6, eyeing c4 for jumps. Magnus plays queen to d3, centralizing. Gukesh plays queen to e6, preparing pressure on the e-file. Magnus plays rook to c5, controlling the c-file. Here, Gukesh plays pawn to e4, a critical moment opening lines. Magnus checks with queen to d4. Gukesh calmly moves king to g8. Magnus plays rook to d1. Gukesh plays pawn takes f3, opening lines around Magnus's king. Magnus plays rook to e5, attacking queen and knight. Gukesh finds the cold-blooded queen to h3, a killer move, threatening mate and maintaining tension. Magnus captures with king takes f3. Gukesh plays knight to c4, activating with tempo. Magnus plays rook to a5, aiming for counterplay. Gukesh captures with knight takes a5. Magnus recaptures with pawn takes a5. Gukesh checks with queen to f5. Magnus's king moves to g2. Gukesh checks again with queen to c2, forcing the king to g1. Gukesh plays knight to f5, attacking the queen. Magnus plays queen to d7, attacking the knight. Gukesh plays knight to e3, threatening queen to g2 checkmate. Magnus plays rook to d2 to block the mate. Gukesh plays queen to c1 check, forcing the king to f2, then knight to g4 check, forcing king to e2, then knight to e5, attacking the queen. Magnus plays queen to e7, attacking the knight. Gukesh plays knight takes c6, removing the last dangerous pawn. Magnus plays queen to e4. Gukesh plays rook takes a5, simplifying into a winning position. Here, Magnus resigns. In this game, Gukesh's bold pawn to b5, pawn to c6, and pawn to d5 were turning points. They opened the position while Magnus's king was uncastled. His cold-blooded queen to h3 and calm knight jumps sealed the game while maintaining tactical threats throughout. With this win, Gukesh defeats Magnus Carlsen for the second time in a row, proving his fearless calculation and strategic depth. He now leads the tournament with 5 consecutive wins, showing that the new generation is here, not just to participate, but to dominate. If you enjoyed this analysis, like and subscribe for more high-quality chess breakdowns, daily coverage, and in-depth explanations of the biggest games in the chess world. Who will win the tournament, and can Magnus strike back? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.